And the only thing you have over that third relationship is influence and the way that you trust and you work with the people on those two sides. And it's because of the uncertainty that's associated, the ambiguity that's associated with that third relationship where all politics really begins and ends. And that's just a little tiny network of 3 people. Every day, you and I walk through hundreds of thousands of these indirect linkages over which we think we have control because we're being deluded by our egocentric networks. But in fact, many of the endpoints of our egocentric networks are connected with each other, and we don't have direct control over them at all. And usually we find out about it because somebody has undermined us in a meeting or because somebody has sung our praises someplace else. It can be both positive and negative. You can have positive and negative outcomes from it. But that's a little tiny 3-person network. And that's where it begins. So let's step it up. Let's move to a larger organizational network. Here you'll see a command and control system, the hierarchy, that's over to the left. And you'll see the workplace network that's over to the right. The black nodes represent the individuals, and the colored nodes that you'll see actually are the mathematical cut points in graph theory, or what we call centrality in social network analysis. I'll talk about that in just a moment. In fact, maybe I'll mention it right here. You see that yellow node right there? That's called a hub. It's directly connected to a lot of people. This green node here is a gatekeeper, connects one part of an organization to another. And actually, by the way, anytime you are mathematically connected to people, which you all are because you all know one another at some level, then everybody has a little bit of yellow, a little bit of green, and a little bit of the red, which doesn't look like it's connected to anybody because that's a measurement of the indirect linkages. That's the link that you can't control for. And I call that position really a pulse-taking position. These 3 positions are in every organic system. And they have a very interesting output and outcome when we are talking about human systems instead of electronics or animal systems. You can watch these things roll out inside baboon troops and things like that. I mean, other animal systems, but let's just stick with humans for now. The interesting thing is that the CEO or the director or the admiral or the general here at the top is right here in the network. Now, for those of you who may not be able to see in the back, the direct linkages in this command and control system, the direct reports, are 6 in number, and then they cascade down. But the linkages in the actual work network, in this particular case, are 5. And when I mentioned that to the general, let's say in this particular case, he said, oh yes, that's right, because Stan and I, we're not getting along, we've disagreed, and he's talking to about the person that occupies the green node. But because he can't see this map, he's thinking of his egocentric network, and he says to me, Dr. Stevenson, 5 out of 6 isn't bad, it's good. Because that's the egocentric network. He's not thinking about the indirect linkages. So he's trusting the information that he's getting from the 5 out of the 6, but what's interesting is that he can't see that 4 out of the 5 are not broadly connected and may not be in touch with the rest of the organization. And that's the information that he's receiving upon which he makes decisions, which affect the lives of others. Now, I cannot sit here in comfort and look at this and say, there but for the grace of God go I, because I can tell you, it's not just that general. This happens to every single one of us every day when we take in information from our networks and make decisions on them. Which is why I argue we need to be measuring this. Let's not leave it to chance. Let's be proactive and let's be measuring it routinely, just like we do our human capital. Because here's what happens. These 2 systems don't exist in a model clean like this. They come together in reality. And when they come together in reality, they form networks which can overlap and undermine authority. They can also support authority. Who knows? If you're not measuring them, how do you know? So what systems are doing now, and when they try to measure social capital, is they're trying to look for who are these connectors. Because you can't vote yourself into being a high connector. Remember the end article in the New Yorker magazine many years ago when the fellow said, I've got 500 friends on Facebook, so I invited them all for a great cocktail party in Manhattan, and nobody came. And that's because they're not predicated, you're not collecting colleagues and friends, you have to be deeply connected with them through trust-based relationships. This is what Malcolm Gladwell talks about in his articles on in his book also on the tipping point, and he's been happily a long supporter of this work. And what I talk about is that you and I are in this room, and we may be, by virtue of of the documents of the Founding Fathers, created equally, but we are not connected equally, and we never will be. And it is that unequal connection which we must come to terms with. We need to accept that, we need to understand it, and we can measure it. So, this is the tiniest, going back to a model, this is the tiniest molecule, if you'll forgive the chemistry reference, that one can draw, which has the mathematical distinction between all three of these positions. It happens to number in 12. Don't ask me why. People joke about it all the time. They call it my apostolic molecule. I don't know why. But if I remove one of these nodes, then I lose the mathematical distinction between the three. But there is the hub at the center of things. These are people that are broadly connected to a lot of people. And remember, they're trusting people. So that means it takes time to maintain that trust. So they're in the center of this very close-knit group of folks that and they're working to keep those relationships going. A gatekeeper bridges across different parts of the organization, and pulse takers are indirectly linked. And one of the things that I've determined over the 30 years of research in this field, it's an empirical number. I don't know if it means anything further than just a sheer empirical outcome. But we know that if we go below, everybody has a hub, a gatekeeper, pulse taker quality to them. But if we take just the key, most strategic connectors within a culture, we find that those people, one, are unusual suspects. They're not who you think they are. It's number one. That's the surprise. And the other thing is that we find that if we take the top 5%, we can produce sustainable change, and in a predictable way, and on time. And then we double our odds by getting the top 10%, or the top 15%, or the top 20%. But if we drop below 5%, no matter what we do, the change doesn't stick. That's why I say it's an empirical number. It's been run over thousands and thousands and thousands of events. So this is really the small little molecule of change that works in every organizational culture, and I mean not just in the United States, but this research has been carried across different national cultures, and we find it to be the same. You might want to say, well, why is that? Because we have different cultures. Yes, we do, and we have a sea of biological diversity in this room, but we share a common genetic structure. It's the diversity of the array of the amino acids on that shared common structure which determines the biological diversity. And as an anthropologist, I appreciate cultural diversity, but I know that beneath that cultural diversity, there's these common structures of these networks interacting with these command and control systems, which produce these diverse outcomes. And what I'm talking about today is something that's pan-human, pan-cultural. Humans have always been driven to connect. So let's talk a little bit about each one of these. Hubs are connected to a lot of people. And you know what they're like? They're guileless. They're like children. They love to connect. They don't even know they're at the center of these networks or at the center of the star pattern. And so as a result of that, if you have a piece of confidential information or a secret, you want to be really careful about telling a hub, because they can't help themselves, they just communicate. They're the great communicators, they get it out there. So if you want to produce a political leak, be sure to tell a hub and then tell them not to tell anybody. But you want to exercise caution. These hubs, they don't mean to cause harm, they just can't help themselves. They love to connect, and they're amazing communicators. The gatekeepers are ones that are typically more guarded and are bridging, so they can stop information across a bridge, or they can broker it and make it go a lot faster. Now, when I talk about these positions, I mentioned some personality traits, and personality does not determine who these people are. It simply is an attribute of some of their characteristics. Because we've tested people before, and we find that we can find a great communicator, but they may not be a hub. So the point I'm trying to make here is that you're unequally connected in these organizational cultures. You can't vote yourself into these positions. You emerge into these positions because of past events. And whatever it is whatever it is who you are today, which is why I argue for why we need to measure these. Just in the same way I would argue why you need to go in and get an annual physical, because you want to be getting your baseline and check it on a yearly basis, or maybe every 2 years. The pulse takers are the most subtle. They're the Machiavellis of the world. They're below the radar, they see what's going on, and most of us really never see them. And the only time they really emerge is usually in a time of great stress or emergencies. I could go on more about these, but I'm just going briefly over the top of them just to make the point. So now I've talked about all three of those positions, I'm going to give you an example of how they operate. This is a particular example of Doctors Without Borders, and these little squares represent people in their respective countries. I've got Belgium, the UK, the Netherlands, and France. And the lines that are connecting them are their self-reported lines that are confirmed two-way. If I said I work with you, the line goes down, but if you say you work with me, the line goes down. So that's a confirmed tie. I can say that I'm connected to everybody in the world, and that would just be my perceptions. And so I'm not interested in people's perception on this example. I'm interested in what really is more reflective of what's happening on the ground. So it's going to be confirmed. So anytime you see a line, it's a two-way link. The different colors represent how they first began. The UK and Belgium first formed a group, the Netherlands and France formed their group, and then they later merged together to be more effective at flying to Haiti or China or other places around the world where these emergencies occur and these doctors are called into action. Now, every one of these people belongs to a community, a hospital, a primary care facility, but they're connected together in this organization that cuts across all of that because of their commonly held values and behaviors around helping others. What ended up happening in this particular organization is that one of these individuals decided that he, in this case, wanted to move from one country to another to experience the lifestyle of another country, and so talked with his colleagues and his networks and said, are you all right with this? I'd like to, my last job, I want to work in another country, and I won't say the name of the country, but he said, I'd like to do that, and will I upset the apple cart? And everyone said, no, we'll support you in that, no problem. Give us your contacts, we'll make sure we can, we'll bridge the gap of you being gone, and we'll make things happen. And we'll see you later on the next, the next earthquake or the next disaster. So he went and he went to another country and worked. And what happened about 6 months later is that the organization, the ties that were binding people together, there ended up being slowly over time various disputes, information got misplaced, the ball got dropped, so to speak, and they ultimately came to a conclusion that they would be better off working in two groups. And the actual anthropologist that was making this observation did not understand why this happened. But I reran this data and using these mathematical algorithms, and I was able to determine that the person that actually made the move was the accidental connector. He was all three of these positions, these statistical positions of hub, gatekeeper, and pulse taker, in complex networks can merge into one powerful position. It's what I might call a radioactive person. Well, the interesting thing about this particular doctor, he didn't know he was a combination of all those positions. He just was looking to move to work to another country. Nobody else knew. So now let me bring this back to your own situation. Have you ever had a change initiative where if one person left or changed positions, things seem to fall apart? Or forget a change initiative. Have you ever had somebody leave an organization, either retire early or maybe move to another organization, and things didn't seem to go so smoothly and you could never figure out why? This is what we call the type 2 statistical error. It's the thing that we don't see. It's the one that got away. It's Bill Gates walking out of IBM before IBM knew what they had. Too late now. So what happened is that this colleague was a statistically deeply connected person who could be measured if we were measuring social capital.